Estes e outros conteúdos estão disponíveis em www.beiratv.pt.
It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of this project. I'd like to thank Cristina Rodriguez for the opportunity. I was here for just a few days in May for my last research trip, but it remained in my memory for a long time after the visit because of the warmth of the people I met here. People such as Miguel and Filippo, who were my guides, who answered my numerous questions, but more importantly, who told me their stories. I felt very welcomed here in the museum by the staff, by Paolo Longo, by Nunu, Manuela and many others. And the wonderful women in the Aduf workshop who invited me into their place. They have no English, I have no Portuguese, but they taught me with their hands how to stretch the skins over the frames and make an Aduf. My presentation will describe my journey from the research trip to the work I made for this exhibition. It will reflect upon my thinking, the methods and the materials I chose to work with. These photographs were taken in my last visit, and I show them here because I think of them as a sketchbook, and they record my first impressions, my immediate responses to this place. It is, of course, a spectacular landscape, but more importantly, there seemed to me to be a powerful sense of place here, which is tangible through the relationships, the connections, and the attachments the people here have with this place. Looking back at these photographs, I can see that there is a preoccupation with materials from and of the landscape, of people inscribing the landscape and the landscape inscribing itself upon people. I became interested in the layers of histories and memories, some buried deep, half hidden underground. Some histories inscribed upon the surface, such as the fossils in Pena Garcia. I was also interested in the stratification, the layering of histories, of time made visible, and in a sense, memories made visible and etched upon the surface. These gourds hanging inside the watermill workers' house were once used to carry water. The walls of the building are made from clay and rocks from the local environment. This relationship between materials found in the environment and the lives of the people who once lived here caught my attention. There is a history of making things by hand here, of know-how, of knowing how to work with materials. The marks of the making are evident on the surface of objects, leaving a trace on their surface. And I'm thinking here of something George said yesterday when he was talking about the bagpipes, of how they had to use modern technology to replicate the instruments, of the incredible precision of the craft making. Many of the objects here in the museum were designed to be used on a daily basis and are made from materials such as leather, wood, flax, stone, all of them local. This interaction between materials and the human body seemed to me to be almost present in the objects themselves. I thought too about the time involved in the making, of the pace of making these objects, a speed determined by the hand and the body, and how this sense of time is almost inscribed in the objects. And a strong sense of loss, a loss of memories and a way of life, but also that connection between these objects and the hands that made them and used them. In the next few slides, I contextualize this project in relation to my own practice and try and show the connections between my past work and the work I've made for this exhibition. The process of drawing is central to my practice, and the starting point of my drawings is often data or digital information about the body or the landscape. I move between the digital into analog practice. I'm interested in the status of the hand-drawn document in relation to the technologically produced document. How is the drawing read and understood, particularly when it contains the same information as the scientific document? My practice is engaged with mapping for some time, mapping the body, mapping the environment, and the interrelation between the two. The visual language of maps is a utilitarian one, a scientific one, but also an artistic one. Maps are beautiful objects. They have always been selective about what they represent. They reveal what they wish to show, determine what is seen. There is a relationship between maps, decision-making, and power. This is one from a series of 5 drawings from the Diffusion project, which was exploring air quality in Manchester. The coloured dots represent sites of high air pollution across Greater Manchester, and they were, this information was taken from environmental data sets in the area. There is a history of the use of dot maps in medical geography, and a notable example was a cholera map produced by Dr. John Snow in 1855, which established the link between the use of water pumps and cholera outbreaks in London. The black drawing, the larger drawing, is of a mast cell. The reference for that was a scanning microscopic image, electron scanning microscopic image. Mast cells contain histamine and play a key role in allergies such as asthma, and so they're very implicated in poor air quality. If maps are about enclosing spaces within fixed boundaries, I wanted to draw attention to the porosity of the body. The environment enters the body through the breath. There is a direct exchange. The work explores links between the internal body and the external environment, between climate change and intercellular change. People construct cities and are in turn affected by the cities they create. This drawing came out of a short residency in a hospital radiology department. I was looking at angiograms, which are X-rays of blood vessels. I wanted to explore the idea of taking this expert image, this scientific image, and placing it into a different context. Medical historians such as Nicholas Rose argue that there is a rise in the visual means of representing knowledge, particularly within biomedicine, so the expert image. Science is a knowledge-producing process, but it's also an image-producing process. Images are important resources in the public evaluation and popularization of science. This drawing is a map of Manchester. It reimagines the transport and communication systems as an angiogram. The ebbs and flows of the city, the bus routes, the rail lines, the river and canal systems have been turned into a visceral map. This is a microscopic image of brain cells. I found it on the internet. And it was produced using a digital technology. It can only be seen through that technology, and it is of course just constructed out of code. I wanted to reverse this process and take this disembodied virtual image and bring back the materiality. I took the image into the printmaking process of etching, which involves engaging with materials, with the zinc plate, with the handmade paper, the physicality of pushing the ink into the grooves of the plate, soaking the sheets of paper, rolling them through the press. This process, to me, this putting a print through this process, the final print retains a memory of that process. There's a presence to prints, I feel, which is a sort of memory of that process. The idea of measurement is a key theme in my practice, measurement of the body and the environment. This drawing was made by only using vertical and horizontal lines, which resemble the lines of a graph paper. So I'm trying to describe an organic form which curves and bends by limiting myself to that structure, in a sense working against the grain and alluding to systems of measurement which are outside and separate from the object which they are measuring. This image is based upon a medical scan of glial cells in the brain. Glial cells surround neurons and they provide support and insulation between them. I'm interested in the networks and systems of the glial, which seems to replicate or to represent the rhizome as a model. The model of the rhizome resists organizational structure. You can enter it from any point in the system, and one point can be connected to any other. There is a sense of always being between things, being in the middle. And in a sense, this kind of model offers up some kind of liberation from structures of power and dominance. This is the first in a series of drawings and is based on a computer-generated simulation of neural cells and networks, and it's taken from the Blue Brain project, which is attempting to map the human brain. This first drawing was made from observation. There's a huge amount of information in there. It was a very time-consuming and slow process. I was interested in the speed of digital information, of how complex images and data can travel in seconds across the internet, and the speed with which the human body makes sense of this information. I decided to make more drawings at regular intervals based upon the first one, but without looking at it from my memory. So it's, in a sense, I was setting up an artistic experiment. My observations were that there is a loss of information. Yes, there are far less neurons in that drawing, and the edges have changed. They're no longer square, the boundary is much more fluid. But something else is happening. The drawing, the mark making is taking over. The image has become more about the act of drawing rather than representing something. And there is a different kind of knowledge making here, one which is looking inwards into the imagination. And now I return to the Design for Desertification project. This image is a map of Idanha-a-Velha. I had asked Christina for some maps of the region as part of my research gathering, and she sent me some very detailed maps with layers of information about the topography, which I saw as compressed images because I didn't have the software to separate them. When I saw this image, I knew I'd found a starting point. It was important that the method I used to work with this data engaged with materiality. I still had very strong memories of the rocks, the colours, shapes and textures of this place. I started collecting different clays and mixing them with water to develop a kind of palette. I realised, I had this gut feeling that the contrast between the earthy clay and the abstracted numbers could work very well. The work is very detailed, and there was also a lovely contrast between the grainy clay I was working with, which was quite lumpy at times, and the very fine brush. The work was also very time-consuming. I was working very slowly, very carefully, and in a sense this sort of evoked the sort of craft-making skills which had sort of caught my imagination when I first came here. In a sense, I was enacting them through this drawing. From a distance, the drawing resembles or alludes to a body, to tissue or organs or some kind of internal bodily network. Well, to me, I was actually speaking to Ines earlier, and because she's an architect, she immediately sees the numbers and sees maps. The mixture of water and clay will, over time, the water will evaporate and it will return back into a fine clay powder which will fall off the surface of the paper. The drawing will fade and disappear. This was an important consideration in using this material, its fugitiveness, which mirrors the process of desertification. The speed with which the drawing disappears is entirely dependent upon the environment in which it is placed. A hot, dry, sunny environment will have a different effect than a moist, cooler one, but also the human environment is critical. Placed in the context of a museum with people who are knowledgeable in conservation practices, and can use their expertise to conserve it, it potentially has a greater chance of surviving. I wanted to emphasize that these are my first thoughts and reflections on this work. It often takes me years to really process and understand fully how a piece of work does what it does. When I'm in the middle of it or close to it, a different kind of knowledge takes over, a tacit knowledge, thinking through the hands. This drawing was produced by mapping the landscape with pins pierced into a piece of paper. I was exploring this idea of presence and absence. But it also, while making it, it was evoking those craft skills of lace making, crochet making. I connected all the habitations, the houses on each map, and they are represented as a cluster of dots with networks of lines which resemble neural circuits and connections between neurons. I was interested in this idea of loss of memory in relation to place, the connections and attachments which form a sense of place. Initially, the drawing was planned to be just shown as paper, but by chance I placed it on an OHP. chance, taking advantage of and recognizing a new way of doing things, I feel always plays a part in the creative process. When I looked at it as a projection, it evoked electricity moving across the connections of the brain, circuits across communication systems, both inside and outside the body, the stars at night, the Earth's atmosphere, and the interrelationship between the two. It is something very simple, transformed through the imagination. Thank you.